Hello and welcome to our book study of Godly Play, A Way of Religious Education by Dr. Jerome Berryman. I am Dr. Heather Ingersoll, the Executive Director for the Godly Play Foundation, and I'm so grateful that you have decided to go on this journey with us. This week, we are talking about Chapter 6, The Imagination and Godly Play, and I'm so delighted and honored to introduce you to our guest today, Dr. Karen Crozier. Dr. Karen Crozier is a proud native and resident of Fresno, California. She is driving innovation and change on racial and environmental justice in agencies and individuals. Dr. Crozier received her BA in psychology from UCLA and then her master's in education, particularly early childhood education, from California State University. She also has a master's degree in religious education and a PhD in theology and personality, or practical theology, from Claremont School of Theology. She's a former associate professor of practical theology and administrator of faculty development and diversity in Christian higher education. In addition to her work in higher ed, Dr. Crozier is a former early childhood educator and a seventh grade algebra teacher with over 20 years in experience in both education and church ministry. Her community leadership efforts include Black reparations, African American infant mortality, and education equity and justice. Dr. Crozier is an entrepreneur who brings scholarly activities such as critical thinking, careful analysis, and a radical imagination to engaging racial equality and justice. So as you can imagine from her bio, Dr. Crozier has a wealth of education and experience to enhance our understanding of religious education and children's spirituality and imagination. She is truly a delight, and I know she will both challenge and inspire you.
Thank you for the question. I was introduced to Dr. Berryman's work, I believe, when I attended the first Children's Spirituality Conference in 2000 something. Was it 2006, possibly? I think, or maybe four, one of those. Having the opportunity at the Children's Spirituality Conference to connect with someone who had an appreciation for children and their own questions and ways of seeing and being in the world was, and that was applied to the context and specifically engaged within the congregational life, because I had grown up where children's ministries and Sunday school, where children were asked to leave service as if they are not integral to who we are as the faith community and context. And so Berryman provided, a intentional, clear, and robust way of saying children are part of our community. We need to be listening to, learning from, and participating with them, because their questions, concerns, interests, and ways of seeing and knowing God, we can learn so much from them as well. In addition, it provided me with the opportunity to look at the holistic reality of the way that public education, I'm a former early childhood educator as well, and the way that public education, when I was trained in my credential and master's program in ECE, it took serious the concept of the whole child. However, it did not take seriously the religious and spiritual realities of the child, of the child's family, of the child's cultural identity and context. And that was a huge hole for me when I was in public education, because I still bought, I still bought into the belief that religion and spirituality, not so much conversion, but understanding the ways that faith and faith traditions shape people as they entered the world and as they continued to make meaning of the world. And Berryman's work was a great segue to bridge both what was not present in public education and what was not present in church Christian education, and provided a lens, a tool, a paradigm for me to be able to take more seriously my own commitments that I had, but did not have a theoretical or practitioner who was actually saying that from a Christian faith-based perspective. Yes, it takes me back to when I first became aware that I wanted to pursue a vocation into early childhood education. It was when I was in undergraduate education in Southern California, UCLA, and attended a church, Black church, well, Black Baptist church to be specific. And it was in the heart of what is known today as South Central Los Angeles on 124th and Main, Christville Gospel Baptist Church. And this particular morning, as a Sunday school teacher, I had the privilege and the responsibility of teaching the range of students from about 5 to 15 because other Sunday school teachers had not shown up. But somehow the babies were there and they needed to be tended to. And so I normally had the high schoolers, the 15-year-olds, but at this time it was like, okay, I got to include the babies too, the younger babies. And so as I had them using a pedagogy that probably wasn't the most appropriate for the broad range of students, had them reading certain texts from the Bible, King James Version, and I realized that not only did they struggle with the these and the thous, they didn't even know, many of them did not know how to decode the these and the thous. And I was so disappointed and alarmed and angered, not so much at them, because they would come show me their report cards and say, Sister Crozier, look, I got A's and B's on my report cards, and I'm looking at the discrepancy. Wait a minute, something is wrong here. How are you getting A's and B's? Am I missing something, or is your teacher in public schools missing something? And as I talked to my mother about that, who was a homeschool liaison for the district for many years, retired from there. And she goes, yes, many of our babies are just being passed. And that's a practice that's been going on for years. And so it was in that moment in Sunday school, in teaching the babies from 5 to 15, that wow, how do we disrupt and change that reality that the literacy skills of our children are not taken seriously and they're just passing, but I want to teach them who they are in the world, why they exist in the world, and how to find their way to where literature becomes alive and their language and communication becomes alive in the ways that they communicate that. And so for me, the whole child was just that I wasn't just teaching them reading, writing, and arithmetic. I was teaching them about life, even in the public school setting. I was teaching them to understand the various structures and systems that are not for you, but how do you define yourself in them and then seek to transform them? And this was second graders, and many people say I was going to be leaving second grade, going to higher ed. I didn't use baby talk and talking to them, or I didn't use smaller people talk. I didn't like that language neither. They're just little adults. No, they are who they are, where they are in life. And I sought to engage them as such and sought this reciprocal life-giving relationship because they were teaching me too. Oh my goodness. Look, I'm recalling one of my second graders. Her name was Precious, but there were so many things that challenged me that made her not so precious. Um, but there was this love and respect for one another as I continue to learn and grow, and as they continue to learn and trust me in who I was as their teacher. Um, and I'm also mindful of one of my other second graders in the public school setting, of how he told me definitively, God is on the cross. And I was like, oh my goodness. And I didn't feel led to try to change it, provide my perspective. Like, that's not my theology or identity. God was on the cross, but God is no longer, but he was confident. And I just held it. And I was grateful for just allowing for wherever he was at that time and what he possibly experienced in the crucifix in his church setting or in his home, that was real for him. And I don't know if he went deeper into associating that with suffering or just to know, to have comfort that God is present somewhere in this world, and that I know that God is on the cross. So, and unfortunately, because we're in a public setting, and in my earlier years of K-12 as an early childhood educator, I wasn't able to go as deep as I would have liked or engage in around how to continue to integrate the religious and the spiritual identity and formation of children in public settings. So that's why I was like, when I saw Berryman, oh my goodness. It was like breathtaking. It was so refreshing. So I wish I would have had the courage to be able, in the time, to be able to integrate those more holistic experiences in caring for the whole child. And then when I did get into theological education and become more aware of Berryman's work for what it meant for congregational settings, it led into my research that I did on children's spirituality around race and gender, and provided a creative lens for me to take seriously their language, children's language, the ways that their understanding is different from our adult understanding, and looking at how do we provide the images and visuals that are necessary to provoke their imagination and not just be limited to the ways that we see and experience and understand God. So that second grader in the public school informed me in how I thought about how do we create environments of worship in conditions that will invite children and adults and the older adults into the ongoing imagination and wonder of the divine in us and with us and beyond us. Yes, one of the recent articles I just read, speeches, comes from June Jordan, who was an activist, poet, author, and academician at Cal Berkeley. And she wrote a title called The Creative Spirit, and it was for Children's Literature Speaks that she gave in 1977. So she articulates how we as authors need to be mindful of the ways of what we're writing so that children would be able to have access to the creative life force that is within them and the creative spirit that is within them. And when we own that which is within us, we give them an opportunity as well to access that. And so that was like beautiful language to describe the ways that I have tried to live and give and owning. Yes, what is it of who I am that invites children to know who they are, to understand who their creative presence, the creative life force, the creative spirit. And June Jordan defines it as it being love made manifest. Now that was a whole nother level. I'm like, oh my goodness, so it's really about love. And if we don't have children's literature that provokes such inspiration and creativity and imagination, it is for naught, as she invokes the Apostle Paul in First Corinthians 13, right? So she's saying, it is in vain if we do not write in ways that take children's views, their creativity seriously, and provoke them to continue to understand how they are alive in the world as well as participants and co-creators along with us. It is for nothing. So do not take children lightly, is what June Jordan is communicating. And do not take the role and responsibility that we as adults have in creating and producing children's literature, children's curriculum, children's illustrations, all of the above, and so much more. So that's what it has meant for me in the work to understand that children provoked their presence speaks. Yeah, their presence speaks. And how can I create the space for them to elicit their story, their wonder, their awe, and knowing that they are growing in their use of language, whichever language, but also to understand how language is communicated beyond words. That is something as well I had to learn, because growing up as an early childhood educator, you try to provide multiple modalities for and mediums for children to access, because words is not always the way that they choose to do that. And how can we become attuned to the multilingual use of their forms of communication, and so that we can be attuned to hear, to know, to decode in the ways that children are showing up to communicate who they are. And I guess one last thing I would just add, as the creative spirit is love being manifest in light of June Jordan, wanting to, that whole ecology of care is how do we make sure that we are caring for children's sake, and not for our self-absorbed interests as adults. Um, so so I love you because I'm learning of who you are in the world and how you are choosing to show up in the world. And what do I need to bring to accompany you in this process to ensure that the fullness of your creativity and your being is being cared for, as well as you creating space for others as well to show up like. Has been, I hope that has been articulated in the way that I have spoken in the prior questions. I guess what more I could add to that is the necessity of the adult being a self. Wow, I'm getting ready to go there. Um, wow. The necessity of the adult being a self means that oftentimes I'm speaking to the reality of how many in children's education and children's formation, it is overwhelmingly a space that is occupied by women. And oftentimes it is the expected role of the woman in that space to teach the children. And then, because even when I was in my Black Baptist church in Los Angeles, I was only allowed to teach the young people because there was no man available. And when a man became available, then either I would have to back up and couldn't utilize my gifts anymore, or I would have to teach alongside the male. And so we really have this very narrow, oppressive view of what constitutes caring for the child or collaborating with God in the formation of the child. And so therefore, to have a self is not like you are fulfilling a particular socially inscribed role if you are a woman in that space. It's more or less knowing who you are to be able to interact with both the child and the divine in the space, so that you know that you are not reinscribing these oppressive systems and structures, but you are seeking to create another self, not create another self, but to invite another self, the divine and the divine, to show up in the world so that you all can be in awe as you make meaning of what that particular existential experience means for each self and the collective self. Yes. Yes. And I guess I will add into that question, it requires the work of healing from the ways that we are imposed upon, especially as women in many of our institutional, denominational, and local church settings, the ways that we have been inscribed, uh, prescribed, and not having the autonomy, authority, and awareness of what it means to know, redefine what that means for herself and all of us in the faith tradition, the context in which we are occupying, living, inhabiting. As well as to, lastly, I just would say that the divine, yes, to co-collaborate with the divine as well. This is to hold loosely our particular conceptual understandings of what constitutes life. So it's not saying everything goes. I'm not saying that. But what it is saying, you are living into each day and into each moment and knowing that, wow, God transcends all of that which we know in our particularity, all of which we are in our particularities. And so how can we hold loosely that which we have come to know, to grow into ever greater dimensions of our encounter and experience with the divine, as well as with the children who have been placed in our care, as well as nurturing ourselves to be open to that reality so that we will not become rigid or fixed or close-fisted to the possibilities of how the divine continues to invite us into new dimensions of life with the divine as well as with the children. Well, here's a plug of my book, Fannie Lou Hamer's Revolutionary Practical Theology, Racial and Environmental Justice Concerns. You can get From my website, jewelofjustice.com, or at a reduced fee price, or go online at Brill or Amazon to get it at the regular price of $64 on Amazon and Brill, and $55 online with the autographed copy at jewelofjustice.com. And in the book, I began chapter 1 with Fannie Lou Hamer's alternative redemptive education. And it was framed that because as a young woman, a girl who grew up in Mississippi, rural Mississippi in 1917, she only was able to go to school, public school settings, 4 months out of a year, and only lasted to the 6th grade because she had to spend more time in helping her poor, rural, working class family to make ends meet when they still didn't have enough to eat as sharecroppers in an economic system that was highly exploitative, extractive, and dehumanizing in so many unjust and ungodly ways. And so, in this context, though, Fannie Lou Hamer was able to be educated by her Black family in the ways that they would sing songs after they would leave the plantation fields, as her father, who was also a minister, who would share jokes with the family to lighten the load the day. She was the youngest of 20 children. And it provided her with a context to understand the role of oral communication, as well as she was invited to read in her family. She was invited to give speeches at an early age. And so she was learning the value of what it meant as being in a system that was oppressive to her race and her culture, but not one that she did not feel valued in the gifts that she had to bring. And so the Black family played a role, and she also names the role that the Black church played. The Black church taught her how to love and to express love alongside with her family, to have self-respect and to know that she was somebody in the world. And so race and environmental justice work, in which my work with children, helped me to appreciate the lens of her childhood experience and not only her adult experience. It provided a tool, a lens, a perspective and a lens to see throughout the lifespan that we must be tending to our babies as well. And how are they, back to this ecology of care, how are they being cared for so that when they grow up, they can pass on as well as continue to live into this ecology of care. And that is who Fannie Lou Hamer became known as, someone who exhibited such love for her enemy, love for her oppressors, love for the white college students who came to Mississippi from the up north and out west during the voter registration campaign that they were doing back in 1964 called Freedom Summer. She loved the young people. She had a great affection for the young people because she felt that they were the chosen one of God in their love to not tolerate injustice, because they were speaking a truth in a language that she didn't even find amongst her peers, because her peers had become afraid, and it was costly. Many lost their lives. Many were tortured, were jailed. She was even jailed and tortured. She was kicked off the plantation. She was shot at and left for dead. And so it was a very costly endeavor to try to demand as well as exercise one's humanity. But because of her faith in God and faith in change and faith in people, she provided a different lens in a way of living in this country, even as one who was so far removed from the center. And so my work has always tended to understanding and being sensitive to how are the children doing too, because it's not just about us adults. In what ways are we seeking to address what is happening, as I call our babies? And for me, our babies are not necessarily my biological children, and our babies has no respect of age. It's anybody that's younger than me that's that I am assuming responsibility for, because what is happening, especially within the African American culture, in reality, with the various challenges and stressors that we have had to deal with since uh, slavery in this country, the family structure has been destroyed, tampered with, undermined from the very time where Black people didn't even have a legal right to be married in this country, from the time that Black people, Black men were used for breeding, for creating more babies and bodies for the slave owner and plantation owner, to Black women being raped um, for fulfilling the lust of white men. And Fannie Lou Hamer even named, she said, I can't believe you are against integration because you have been doing it for a long time. And as she says, many of my aunts and uncles got blue eyes and blonde hair, and no Black man didn't do that, in her language. And so therefore, we have to take seriously these atrocities on humanity to understand the new ways, the distinctive ways in which Black people have had to experience family life, community life, church life that's different, but yet similar to, different from, and also similar to other racial ethnic groups and cultures, and how we account for the work we do around racial and environmental justice. And the significant thing that I will close with on this point is that my work um, around environmental justice, Fannie Lou Hamer helped to give a very clear, succinct lens that is more about people, place, and space, and to where the focus on people is not necessarily anthropocentric, but it's not bifurcated in the sense that it's environment or the people. And so she was able to show me in her work, her leadership, her legacy of we got to care for the people in the particular place and space in which they occupy, and do that holistically across the lifespan. And that was her commitment as a Christian, and that was her commitment in making sure the younger generation would be able to live life abundantly beyond the stressors and oppressions that she experienced in growing up in rural Mississippi from 1917 to 1977. Fannie Lou Hamer, in her work with children, she was significant in starting the Head Start that was tending to the needs of the Black poor children of rural Mississippi in her area of Ruralville. And it is still in existence today, the Head Start. And what is of, wow. And they also have a scholarship in her honor. The Fannie Lou Hamer Memorial Garden and Museum Committee have a scholarship for college students in her honor. And I just wanted to share that the Head Start, in its still being there, shows that her commitment to understanding that young children, our babies, matter too, which must be different from just what we experience, I should say, what I have experienced in California, when there's been an emphasis on Head Start education, has only been for production or the marketplace, and it must be beyond the marketplace, but for life. And so we should not be commodified. Well, I'm gonna start crying. We should not be commodifying our babies, and because that becomes the perpetuation of what Fannie Lou Hamer was seeking to transcend. But we must be aware that Head Start is not a Head Start for commodification, but a Head Start to undo the systems of oppression that unjustly deny access to poor, darker skinned people in families in this nation. And I hope that we as religious educators, both in the church, in the academy, in the community, will come with a sensitivity to understand our roles, both within our particularities in the context, but also in governmental programs and initiatives that do not take seriously our values and how we are able to infuse our voice and experience in those areas as well.